ditch with all the ice that's out there, but just be careful. We appreciate you coming in under these kind of weather conditions. So today we're going to take up Senate Bill 205 about water rights, and we have only have 2 proponents that testify. We have no opponents and no neutral. So you have the whole day to yourself there, Earl. So put some water bank somewhere else. So with that, we'll ask for the reviser's report. Tamara.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, committee. I do want to point out that you should have a reviser's memorandum, and just at the very bottom, there is a very brief description of an Attorney General's opinion that touches on this topic, so I did want to point that out before I talk about the bill. Senate Bill 205 relates to water rights with respect to multi-year flex accounts, or MIFAs, and water banks. So first, in Section 1, the bill would authorize the chief engineer to approve complete applications for the establishment of a multi-year flex account, even if the water right participates in a water bank. This provision would expire on December 31st of this year. Additionally, in Section 2, the bill would establish that a water right, or any portion of a water right that is in a safe deposit account associated with a water bank, shall not be eligible to enroll in a multi-year flex account during a calendar year in which water from that water right was withdrawn from a safe deposit account. Also, water from a water right that is in a safe deposit account shall not be withdrawn from that account while the water is enrolled in a MIFA. The bill would take effect upon publication in the Kansas Register, and I will be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Tamara. Committee, any questions for the reviser? Seeing none, thank you very much. Next up, we have Chief Engineer. Earl, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. I will be fairly brief, so you can get back to the coffee if you need to on this cold morning. I think you have my testimony in front of you, so I certainly won't go line by line and read it. I think Tamara did a pretty good job of laying out the basics of this bill. Again, my name is Earl Lewis. I'm the Chief Engineer of the Kansas Department of Agriculture's Division of Water Resources, and I'm here to testify in support of Senate Bill 205. As Tamara laid out, this bill really applies to the area that we also call GMD5. The boundaries of the Central Kansas Water Bank overlie the boundaries of GMD5. And within a Central Kansas Water Bank, there's the ability under state law to have a safe deposit account. And so in a year where maybe somebody didn't use their full water right, didn't need that water, they can take the part that they didn't use and put that into a safe deposit account for future use. There is a provision already in statute that over time, that kind of, they call it a leaky bucket, it loses about 10% a year. But you can continue to put water in it and build your safe deposit account. So you can pull it out when you need it. So if you need more water than your water right authorizes in a single calendar year, you have the opportunity to take water out of the safe deposit account under a term permit issued by our office, and then utilize that water. We also have another tool created by the legislature called the multi-year flex account, or we call it MIFA. You might hear that term quite a bit. And again, it has many of the same provisions. You can enroll in a MIFA, and we get a 5-year allocation. The user gets a 5-year allocation rather than a single-year allocation. So it gives the producer the ability, it's not, I shouldn't say producer, it's any water right owner can apply for a MIFA. It's not irrigation specific, but it's producers, irrigation folks that are typically using this. They can enroll in a MIFA, and then again, under a term permit, they can exceed their authorized quantity in any one calendar year, but not exceed the 5-year quantity. And there's also a provision that we not increase the consumptive use. So in almost all cases, they don't get 5 times their authorized quantity. They'll get 5 times kind of their past history use, or 5 times the net irrigation requirement. But the key is we try and not increase the consumptive use under either of those programs. As we were looking at this issue in 2022, last year, we were looking at the language from both statutes, and there appeared to be potentially some conflict. We couldn't necessarily determine whether there was an issue there or not. Historically, there had been folks that had could use water bank water or use a MIFA. And so we asked the Attorney General what his opinion was to clarify what the legal, what the requirements were. And January 6th, he came back, and again, as you can see from the Attorney General's opinion, the opinion was that the language says if you've ever had a water right enrolled in the water bank, then you can never have a MIFA, right? It's one or the other for all time. We didn't necessarily think that was what the intention was. And as you might imagine, in 2022, when it was a very dry year, we had a number of folks that went past their authorized quantity. Statewide, we had 670 MIFA applications filed. And the statute, again, allows that if somebody files for a MIFA before December 31st, they can include the current calendar year, so they can include 2022 in their 5-year period. So it's a really good tool for folks that towards the end of the year realize that I've overpumped my water right. I want to make sure that I don't end up on the overpump list and get that fine and suspension, but it means I'm going to borrow some water from future years. So we had, again, 670 of those statewide that were in that situation and filed for a MIFA. 250 of those were within the boundaries of the Central Kansas Water Bank. We know of about 100 of those that utilized their allocation under their water right, took water out of their safe deposit account that had been deposited in previous years, used that water, and then still needed more water, so they continued to pump and then filed for a MIFA. So that's really the kind of the key group that we're talking about here. And in many cases, you know, those folks come into our field office staff helped them fill those applications out, ran all the calculations for them. And so our staff has certainly been a part of this project as well. And each of those folks filed those applications in good faith. They filed all those paperworks, getting advice from us and from the Groundwater Management District that this was appropriate and legal. And then again, January 6th, we get a Attorney General's opinion that says that that's not illegal, and we're kind of caught in this little catch-22 where we've helped people fill out the application, but now we've got an opinion that says it's illegal for us to process them. And so this bill would say for that group that has already filed, this is kind of a one-time exemption to say they filed those in good faith, we helped them fill them out, let's go ahead and process them the way that we understood that we thought was legal prior to the Attorney General's opinion. Let's go ahead and move those through the process. And then going forward, let's clarify what we believe the intent was of the language between the water bank bill and the MIFA, which is you can use one or the other, but you can't use both in the same year. Doesn't mean you can't have a water bank safe deposit account. Doesn't mean you can't have a MIFA, but you can't necessarily use them in the same year. Again, we want to try and make sure that we're not increasing the overall use in that area, especially in those dry years when we've got problems. So that's what this bill does in short. And again, I think Tamara did a good job of laying that out. I'm certainly happy to answer questions whenever you see fit.
Any questions for Senator Dahl?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Earl, those transfer, let's say a guy had his flex account and 2 years into his flex account, he sells his ground with his water rights. Does that go with it?
Yeah, it would transfer with it. Yep, you bet.
Any other questions? Senator Reichman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I'm still trying to wrap my head around all this stuff. Water is obviously very, very important. You mentioned that some were over-pumping. Could you go through that process if you know that, first, how do you know they're over-pumping? And secondly, what do you do when they do over-pump? Thank you.
You bet. And so we're going to find out folks overpump really in kind of 3 different ways. First, there are times when we're out doing some field inspections, and there were a number of folks this year where we went out and looked at their meter, and obviously we have the information from last year's water use reports. We know whether they've overpumped, and we found a few of those folks and advised them. One thing I failed to mention in my testimony is we advised them of the option for the MIFA when we found them. We advised every single water right owner that was eligible for a MIFA this year. We sent them a postcard and said, this is a bad year. This might be something you want to check, but you got to do it before December 31st. And so everybody had that opportunity. So that's one way is we go out and see it in the field. part of the reason for that postcard is we wanted folks to go out before the end of the year and check their meter themselves, right? Our water use report deadline is March 1st, so as you might expect, we had a lot of folks that go out and read their meter into January, sometime in February. We want them to read it earlier in case they do find that they overpump, then they can choose or not to utilize this opportunity. And then the third way is when they report their water use. As required by law by March 1st, then we'll look at their water use and we're in the middle of that process right now. Obviously, we're getting some of those in, and over the next few months, we will do that analysis and figure out how many folks we find that have overpumped. Several years ago, we had kind of that same question, what do we do? We have a number of folks, certainly at that time, that were making business decisions, that were getting kind of a letter that said, don't do that again, or a small fine, and again, working with a number of groups, including the ag groups, came up with what we refer to as the penalty matrix. And so it talks about if this is your first time that you've overpumped, and how long have you overpumped. The statute is up to $1,000 per day. Of overpumping. So we look at what their rate is and how many days they've gone over. And then there's a matrix that says whether, if they've just the first time and it's less than 24 hours, if they just barely went over, then we'll send them a letter and say, we recognize you've gone over. It kind of puts you on the list. If you kind of go further out, more days, then, it's $1,000 a day. We cap it at $10,000 for the first offense. We, again, escalate beyond that. And the other thing is, so capped at $10,000, and we also get the water back in a following year, right? So if we find that they've overpumped by 20 acre-feet in 2022, they'll get an order that says, here's your fine, and then we're going to get 40 acre-feet back in 2024. So there's a water penalty as well. We heard that was the key thing. That can progress. If you get into the second, we can get up to 1 to 3 year suspension, depending on the severity. If you get to three times or more, you can go anywhere from 1 to 5 year suspension. But our maximum is a 5 year suspension, and again, $1,000 per day. And so we'll have it really from May until June or July. We'll be working with folks on that and really identifying the folks that have overpumped and getting that information out.
I think I'd like to follow up that. Thank you. I guess my next question is, what are the numbers on that of how many people are overpumping? And I understand that the House right now is considering a water bill that's going to raise that fine. And what is your thoughts on that? Thank you.
Well, so we won't know for sure until we get all the water use reports in. In 2021, we had, I think, about 250 orders that went out. So that means, there might be a few more that we found that were kind of within that first time that didn't necessarily get an order. But there were about 250 actual orders that went out. We expect that's going to be significantly higher based on 2022 being a very dry year, but we don't know how much that's going to be. The House, the bill in the House that they're actually going to work today, funding bill, actually doesn't talk about the fees on the water. What it does is adopts somewhat, if you've heard about the Blue Ribbon Funding Task Force from a few years ago, it adopts a set-aside of a portion of the sales tax to the State Water Plan Fund. Total revenue from that is about $54 million a year, give or take. And so our agency, along with the Water Office and KDHE, testified neutral, but we appreciate the support because we don't feel it's appropriate as the agencies that money would flow through to be out advocating for that. But certainly there were a number of entities that did, and we're supportive of the effort to try and identify the needs for water and do something about it.
Anybody else? When you're talking about you had water in the MIFA, I mean, consumptive use is what you're not allowed to do. Water that ends up going over that amount. If you're pumping, wouldn't that do? If you're allowed to make up for that, wouldn't that be overconsumption?
Well, what we look about, and MIFAs are only available in groundwater areas. So we think about groundwater being our storage vessel, right? The aquifer being a reservoir, if you will. And so what we're trying to do is balance the needs of a user in a single year that maybe their water right as it was developed aren't adequate for the situation like we had in 2022. But we want to, over that 5-year period, make sure we don't increase the overall draw on that reservoir, that aquifer, over that 5-year period. So it's really the consumptive use over that longer period of time rather than a single year that we're evaluating. But overall, we want to make sure we don't increase consumptive use.
Not seeing any. Committee.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Earl. Is there anybody else that would like to testify as a proponent? Is there anybody who would testify as an opponent? Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, we have one more proponent testimony. That's on WebEx. Is he on? Let's get him in there. Orrin?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes, I got you down as a proponent on Senate Bill 205. Go ahead, and your floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, committee, for allowing me to remotely join you today. We're prepping for a bunch of annual meetings this afternoon, so it's pretty busy in our office. So I appreciate the liberty to remotely join. My name is Orrin Farrell, and I'm the manager for Central Kansas Water Bank Association. And we are testifying this morning in support of this Senate Bill 205. We do have a few concerns that we'd like the committee's consideration on. The water bank has been in operation since 2005. We offer flexibility to our area water users, but at a cost. We do require conservation throughout our programs. We also facilitate sound water policy for Central Kansas. That is one of our missions. I firmly believe that we do that and do it well. We do struggle at times to maintain achieving both goals of flexibility and conservation, but we're always striving to improve our methods. As Earl mentioned earlier, back in 2022, very, very dry in this region. It's no surprise to anybody that's been following the water in the state. So as we were seeing that drought unveil itself this past year, we reached out to the chief engineer and his staff to see what options were available to our area water users. We are getting hundreds upon hundreds of calls in our office asking what options were available. So we wanted to be on the same page with KDA DWR when we were talking to producers as what their staff may be conveying to those same water users. So there wasn't any conflict or confusion. It came to light pretty early on that there might be some conflict between some statutes between the water bank and the multi-year flex account statute. So as Earl said, the KDA did request an AG's opinion. I truly believe that this creates a bias against water users in this region that voluntarily have participated in the water bank to conserve water. It prohibits them from participating in this multi-year flex account program. When it gets down to it, this becomes a water accounting question. It's a policy, but it comes down to water accounting. We've been operating, like I said, since 2005. We have up-to-date water accounting for every participant. We have about 2,000 participants that have these safe deposit accounts, and we maintain that accounting to recognize when or if they are in a multi-year flex account. We do have existing savings account holders that have multi-year flex accounts or have had in the past with no issue. We've tracked that accounting throughout that time with no issue. It comes down to coordination. We can coordinate with KDA DWR in that accounting process so that we don't increase consumptive use going into the future. That's one of the things that we do not want to see happen. Unfortunately, 2022 hit, and we were left with very few options other than just tell the producer to shut off at a potential significant economic impact. And so we proceeded with our status quo of our understanding of the water policy was to allow those withdrawals from the safe deposit account and then also enrolling into the multi-year flex account program. As you may see in my testimony, I did highlight a few sections that I have concern about. Section 2, it talks about the revision to future water policy for how these programs could operate together. Again, I firmly believe this does create a bias against proactive conservation in central Kansas. And that's one of the things that we strongly stand against, if at all possible. If that is the decision of this committee and the legislature, we'll accommodate that and make it work going forward. But it is a concern of ours. And secondly, on the back page of my testimony, I did highlight the language from the Attorney General's opinion that talked about 82A 736 C1. That's specifically the language that the Attorney General highlighted as prohibiting those water users from participating in the multi-year flex account. As I read it, this bill does not address that issue in the Attorney General's opinion. So what can happen is if it moves forward as drafted, this bill could create a disconnect between these two statutes so that there's confusion going forward. And that's something that we would like to see addressed in having the revision that we suggested in that testimony. With that, we're always, as you know, wanting to be a proactive partner in water discussions and water policy. And I'd be happy to stand for any kind of questions the committee may have.
All right, thank you very much, Warren. Appreciate you. And we want to be part of that too. So we need to make sure we have an understanding that to save water, like you talked about it there. Appreciate that. So anybody have any questions for Warren? Senator Francisco?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for joining us in a way that you could participate. So we want to save water and we want to save energy. So this is a good way to do both of those. So can you explain the highlighted words for lease in your recommendation?
Sure. Thank you, Senator, and good to see you, by the way. So the water bank has two programs that it implements. One, we talked about quite a bit this morning, and that is a safe deposit account that allows a water to conserve water and utilize it into future years. The second program is what we call the deposit and lease program, where a water user can set aside all or a portion of a water right at one location for lease somewhere else. And so what we're seeking with this potential revision would be to pull the safe deposit reference out of that section and only talk about that deposit and lease portion of our programs. Again, these programs are allowed anywhere in the state that has a water bank. Right now, we're the only water bank in the state.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions, committee? Senator Francisco?
Would it be appropriate to have our chief engineer comment on the proposed amendment? And I don't know if you've had a chance to see it earlier.
We have seen the proposed amendment. We haven't really studied it in depth, frankly. So I think Orrin's right. I think whatever you feel like is appropriate. I think the question of making sure that we are not increasing the consumptive use overall is our key concern. There, as Orrin correctly states, there is accounting on both sides. I think, just to be frank, I think sometimes that accounting can be extremely complex, and making sure that we stay in line with that intent can be difficult. I'm not saying it can't be done, but it can be difficult. I guess where we started and where we say we support the bill as it stands is because we thought that really was trying to reflect why, our understanding why the language was in those statutes in the first place of saying one or the other, but not both at the same time. But again, we'd certainly, like Orrin said, we'd certainly be happy implementing whatever you all think is appropriate for these programs.
Could you comment specifically on differentiating between water that has been placed in a safe deposit account and then water that was placed in a lease account?
Yeah, you bet. And I think, obviously my comment's more focused on the safe deposit account because I think that's the issue that was more, or the tool that was more used this last year than the deposit lease. I think, and Orrin can certainly comment on this as well, I think what we've seen historically from the deposit lease is most times folks are depositing the whole water right, and then somebody else is leasing a portion of that water right. And so, we're really talking about moving the spot where that use is made in location, maybe not over time, or concentrating it within a single year. And so I think those are two different tools for two different purposes. And so that's why I focused more on the safe deposit account, because it seemed like that was one where, you save up some water on the front end, and then when we get into a dry year like 22, then you pull that out and put that on top of the water right you already used.
All right. Any other questions? That pretty well takes care of our proponents. We don't have any opponents or any of those others, so we won't have any testimony. So with last call for comments, not, we're going to adjourn. Thank you very much.